Good evening, Praise Chapel Fresno, and all those of you tuning in, wherever you're tuning in at, whatever you're tuning in on, we're just glad that you're here with us. Still going through our biblical bios. We're going to be doing Peter today, but there's some things we got to go through first. So if you're going up to the R&R Ranch up there with our brother Rudy and going for the day of the potluck, just make sure that if you're going to be going, if you can take something with you, but we'd like a sign up. We kind of want to get a head count of how many people are going to be out there. Just so that we're aware of exactly how many people we're going to have. But do me a favor, and the next time you're in church, if you're already signed up, put his address in your maps so that you can see exactly where it's at. It's a little difficult to find. I can find I used to have to go to high school up there, so it's pretty easy to find for me, but it's a little windy, but it's a beautiful place. I am amazed with what he's done out there. And it's going to be a wonderful time for each and every one of us just to sit there and see and take part in what he's done. And I know he's really proud of it. And I mean, I'm just in awe of it. So I'm excited to actually get up there and kind of just mess around. But just if you can do that now. Also, kind of on a more serious note, if you can keep our pastors up in your prayers, our founding pastors. So Sister McKinnis, she has been admitted down in Los Angeles for some kind of cardiac event. She's doing well. I spoke with her last night. And my father, founding pastor Orville, he's been keeping me up to date with things and texting me, and I've been in discussions with her nurses and her physicians. So just keep her up in your prayer. She's in good spirits and everything. But when you have a major cardiac surgery, like she's had before in the past, you want to take these things very precautiously. Any kind of sign and symptom, you really want to look as deep and as close as you can to there. They don't want her traveling right now, but once they kind of figure out what's going on, hopefully they can get her back home so she can be here, not just with her family, not just with their church, but also with her primary care physician as well as any specialist she had seen that would have a really deep and delved history with her. So just keep her up in your prayers. Keep our just both of them up in your prayers. I know Pastor Willie's been kind of all over the place right now with this, and he wants to be there for his wife. He wants to help her take care of things. So let's just pray that all of these tests come back negative, and she's allowed to travel back home so we can get her here and get her to see her private physician. So just don't forget about that tonight. Just keep them up in your prayers. And I'm sure a lot of people have been saying, like, oh yeah, I've been hearing and texting, and I understand. I probably have less information than you guys have because parents don't really like to, tell their kids that they're having problems. So I basically had to reach out to her and say, like, what's going on and get involved that way. So just keep them up in your prayers. Don't forget, you can continue to support this ministry, this move of God, this church, via tithes, offerings, and love gifts. You can mail in, drop off your tithes or offerings. We'll get those deposited in a timely manner. You can do it on your smartphone, either through the iStore or Google Play. You can find an app called Easy Tithe. Search Praise Chapel Fresno in that Easy Tithe app, and it'll connect you with us. You can also go to easytithe.com, download it on your desktop if you want to do it that way, if you feel a bit more secure. And also, you can do it or you can go to praisechapelfresno.com, click Give on the menu bar, and it's going to take you to a third-party website we're contracted with, safe, secure, and you can give that way. So we just really appreciate everything that everyone's been doing. I've been getting text after text after text after text of just things that are happening in people's lives. Not just like some of this bad stuff that's been going on, but also just a lot of clarity, a lot of boldness coming out, really kind of taking... if you don't know what it's called practical application. When you take what you've heard or what you've learned in a sermon and you begin to change your lifestyle or add it in there, that's called practical application. And I've had so many confirmations of people that have been texting me and saying, like, this is what I'm going to do now, and this is how I'm going to do it, and that's amazing, and I'm excited for you. I'm excited to see what that does for you, because I'm telling you, the times that I've reached out and I've touched individuals or I've prayed with people and something has happened, it's just bolstered my faith even more. Because it's not that we're always sitting there and saying, well, I hope this is real, but there are some times in your life when you begin to question, like, okay, God, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And then when it happens, it just brings everything up to light, brings everything forward. And it's amazing what it does to your life when you begin to touch other people's lives, when you begin to open yourself up to other individuals and take them aside, whether it be work, friends, family, relationships, whatever it is, just begin to invest and sow into them, and you'll begin to see God move. So just excited to hear that. I was all smiles on Sunday, and I had a problem sleeping on Monday and Tuesday, just because I'm so excited to see what God is doing. And just to know that what he's doing through us is changing individuals, whether it's changing us corporately, but it's also changing individuals into seeing exactly what God is calling them to do. So I'm amazed by that. It's so wonderful. I just can't wait to see what it does to you guys' lives, because I'm gonna be honest, like, it is one of the most amazing transitions you'll ever make in your life is when you start opening up to what God wants you to do. You begin to see God everywhere you go. You begin to hear God everywhere you go, just simply because you're open and you're saying, God, just tell me what to do. Show me where to do this. And the amount of people that came to me and said, I needed to pray for forgiveness because I was hating my soil. You got confirmation that God placed you there for a purpose, and he's opening doors, and he's going to open doors for you to invest in these people, for you to touch them in a way that their spirit will begin to sing, and they'll just want to be around you because there's just something different about you. And then you drag them to church and you tell them this is where life change happens. So just so excited to hear about that. Let's get into BIOS. So we're going through Peter. Peter is basically known as the disciple that continues the church after the death of Jesus Christ. But he doesn't do it right away. And you kind of see that there's this gap in between things that are happening in the Bible. And after the death of Jesus Christ and then to the book of Acts, there's this lull in between there. But he's an outspoken and passionate disciple of Jesus Christ. Peter is also known as Simon. Again, this is one of those things where he's called Simon, but then when he meets Jesus, Jesus calls him Peter, which means rock. He's enthusiastic, strong-willed, impulsive, and at times a bit brash. He started out as a fisherman and listed throughout every single one of the Gospels as the first disciple. So each one of them kind of has different timelines, but when it comes down to those that chose to follow Christ, he's one of the first ones that are mentioned. He strived to be a great man.
Side of the stage you're on.
Excuse me.
Making a statement with your next performance has never been easier.
And for some reason, I knew that was going to happen. It's an ad for music school, and the church is currently looking for musicians. So if that was God speaking to someone saying, yes, you need to get on the praise team, yes, you need to get out here, well, that was your confirmation. But he's a man of great faith, but yet he would falter frequently. And yet he would still grow his faith to become a pillar of the church and the spokesman for the disciples. Basically, any time that it says, then they spoke, they're talking about Peter. Jesus, he would frequently try to teach Jesus. He would frequently try to tell Jesus things. He's accredited with writing 2 letters that would be adopted and canonized into the Bible. It'd be 1st and 2nd Peter. So when you kind of pull Peter's narrative apart, you kind of find out that they're the first mention. And again, I kind of have gravitated to the book of Luke in describing these people because I'm not going over their deeds and different things. I'm going after their character. Who were they? And the book of Luke just seems to be the most detailed about that kind of information. So in the book of Luke, Jesus basically is walking next to the sea, and there's a group of people following him, and Luke's boat is docked, and Jesus just gets into the boat and starts preaching and teaching. And then he tells them, I want you to throw your nets out into the deep of the water. And then Peter's like, yo, we've been doing this all day. I know my job. Who are you? And he's like, we've been doing it all day, and we came up with nothing. And he goes, but if you tell me to do it again, I'll do it. And this is what happened in Luke 5, verses 6 and 7. It says, when they did this, they caught a great number of fish, and their nets began to tear. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. So what does this tell us about his character? Number one is he's a little bold in a sense that he kind of questions it, but he questions it in a very unique way. He doesn't come out and say, are you sure you want me to do that again? Because I've been here all day. No, he says, we've been doing this all day, but if you tell me to do it, I'll throw it out. Now, this is tantamount to who Peter is. He's always kind of questioning things in a unique way. He's uneducated. He's a fisherman. And it's even like in the whole experience of walking on the water, he says, if that's you, call me out into the water. And Jesus does, but again, he doesn't just say, I know that's you. He says it in a way that's kind of like, if it's you, call me out into the water, because if it wasn't Jesus, he wouldn't have called him. So Peter and his crew are astonished. And Peter, at this point, Peter even calls Jesus Lord and tells him to get away from him because he's a sinful man. So he automatically recognizes that there's something about this individual. And again, he would have heard stories and different things like that. So he would know, like, okay, this guy can do something great. So he's over me. And he tells him he can't do it. But then Jesus does this. After he talks to him, he tells him, follow me. And it's interesting that this happens. In Luke 5:11, it says, then they brought the boats to land, left everything, and followed him. It's even said that Peter was married before he followed Christ and basically leaves everything. He's a natural-born leader. He would become the de facto spokesman for the 12, and yet he's part of this inner circle of the disciples. Along with James and John, only those three were present when Jesus raises the daughter of Jairus, when Jesus is transfigured on the mountain. And Peter was even given a special task along with John about the preparations for the final Passover meal. And you can see this connection that him and Jesus have, that Peter and Jesus have. And it was in Matthew 16:18, it says, and I also say to you that you are Peter. So let me preface this. Right before he gets into this, Jesus is asking the disciples, who do they say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Messiah. And Jesus tells him, like, the Spirit has revealed this to you. So he kind of is telling them, and then he says, but I also say to you that you are Peter. So Jesus had changed his name to Peter when he meets him, and meaning the rock, and then he's explaining why he named him Peter. And he says, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. Now, Peter would frequently allow his friendship with Jesus overstep Jesus, and he would be rebuked frequently for it. So I found this, and I just loved it because it just kept going and going and going. But Matthew 14:30-31, it says, but when he saw the strength of the wind, he was afraid. He began to sink, and he cried out, Lord, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reaches out his hand, catches hold of him, and said to him, you have little faith, why do you doubt? Again, Peter would be one that would say, like, he was the most faithful, and Jesus kind of says, like, you got no faith, bro. And then in 16:22 and 23 of Matthew, it says, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, Jesus, saying, oh no, Lord, this will never happen to you. Jesus turned to Peter and said, get behind me, Satan. Kind of a harsh word. If one of my friends that it's a pastor or above me, that would say, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me because you are not thinking about God's concerns, but human concerns. So Jesus is just telling him, like, look, bro, I understand we have a friendship between us, but your concern for me as a human means nothing to me because you're more concerned about humanity than you are about God's plan. Peter, what I like though is that Peter would continue to follow Jesus Christ despite these rebukes, never allowing them to come to alter his connection to Jesus Christ. He's a disciple first, and when you pull that apart, it means student. And teachers often have to correct their students when they're doing something wrong, and sometimes it can feel or sound a bit harsh. And took everything in that Jesus had for him, both good and bad, even though Jesus knew that Peter would deny him when he was arrested. Like Jesus tells him he's going to happen. And we find this in Matthew 26:33-35. It says, Peter told him, even if everyone falls away because of you, I will never fall away. Truly I tell you, Jesus said to him, tonight before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And even if I have to die with you, Peter told him, I will never deny you. And all the disciples said the same thing. So again, Peter kind of being that natural-born leader, getting out and saying the best thing first. And then all the other disciples are like, yeah, I'd do that too. Yeah, that's us. Like, we with you. Now, we know today that Peter did, in fact, deny Christ 3 times before the rooster crowed that day. Peter would be with Jesus at the Garden of Gethsemane, where his impulsive nature would yet cause Jesus to rebuke him in this time. A rebuke from the bestie. And it says in Matthew 26:51 through 52, and at the moment of those with Jesus reached out his hand, drew his sword, and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his ear. Then Jesus told him, put your sword back in its place, because all who take up the sword will perish by the sword. In other Gospels, Jesus tells him, I've called you to love. This is not coming from a place of love. He'd end up running from God after his denials too. And I find that really interesting because at the end of his narrative, when it comes up, we find that Peter is just fishing again. So Jesus reappears to all the disciples in the room, and he tells them, I want you to go tell the good news. And then he even specifically points out and says, but I want you to tell Peter. He needs to hear this the most, because Jesus already knows that he's not with him, that what happened after the crucifixion, he just went right back to being a fisherman. And then Jesus would find him fishing, and he would restore Peter to who he's called to be. The interesting part of this is, as they're out fishing, it says Jesus starts walking up, but they didn't recognize him. And he tells them, Jesus tells them from the shore, he tells them, throw your nets on the other side in the deep. And all the men in the boat all look at each other and they're like, that's Jesus. Because remember, he did this the first time. When we met him, he did this the first time. And so they all know it's him, but no one really acknowledges it. So they get their net again, and it's full of fish, and they get back onto the shore. And Jesus tells them, like, bring a couple of fish for breakfast. And then they're all eating, but no one really acknowledges that this is Jesus Christ. Until Jesus starts asking Peter, do you love me? And then in John 21:17, Jesus asks a third time, he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved that he had asked a third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus says, feed my sheep. So Peter takes his word, he takes this word literal. And then in the book of Acts, after the day of Pentecost, he comes down and he starts feeding the sheep, and 3,000 people are added to the church. They reach salvation on that day. He begins to heal. He refuses to back down despite the beatings, despite arrests, despite imprisonments. He refuses to let that deter him. Now, the day of Pentecost is the first of three stages that he would fulfill this calling of becoming the foundation of the church. The second stage happens. He goes into Samaria, and he begins to preach there to the Samaritans, and they receive the Holy Spirit, and that's in Acts chapter 8. And then the third stage, he's being summoned to a centurion's house. His name's Cornelius. And at first, he's really reluctant to go, but he reminds himself of what Jesus has told him. And then he goes to his home, and the centurion receives the Holy Spirit. So he unlocks three different worlds that day, opening the church doors to the Jews, to the Samaritans, and to the Gentiles. Now, what's interesting is after Jesus tells them, like, feed my sheep, he also kind of foreshadows Peter's death. Peter was told by Jesus in their time that he would die a martyr's death. And while the Bible doesn't specifically tell us how Peter dies, the most commonly accepted form is it was crucifixion, and he refuses to be crucified like Christ, so he says, crucify me upside down. I'm not worthy. That's not biblical. It's not in the Bible. It's just something that is usually adopted by the Catholic Church and spread throughout most of religion, that's how Peter died. Now, we don't know how that's how he died. That's commonly thought of. But what we know is Jesus tells him that he's going to be taken by younger people to a place he doesn't want to go, and that his arms would be outstretched. That sounds a lot like a cross. When Jesus was crucified on the cross, his arms were outstretched. So it sounds like it could be it, but again, that is not actually in the Bible. It's just an acceptable way that people thought he would have died. Now, Peter lived as a rock of the early church, but I mean, imagine this. He built a system, he organized something so well that it would survive for 2,000 plus years, that it's still going today, living and thriving. Like, he developed that 2,000 years ago because Christ said, on this rock, I'll build my church, and the gates of hell will not prosper over it. I find that Just that kind of takes me back to the whole point, like, man, 2023 years ago would have likely been like 2010 years ago, that this system, this organization, like the method of which it has evolved, yes, isn't what Peter would recognize today as the church, but he started something that began to live and has survived thousands of years. So here's 4 lessons we can learn from the life of Peter. When God calls, move immediately. Now, first, Jesus tells Peter, hey, throw your nets back out. And he kind of questions him in a weird way, but he ultimately follows it. And he sees the largest haul of fish he's ever seen in his entire career. Enough to almost sink 2 boats. But get this, then Jesus says, follow me. It says he leaves everything. Doesn't say that he went to sell the fish first. Doesn't say that he went home and told his wife that he's going to be doing something for Jesus. Doesn't say that he started to count the costs between what they could get for the fish, what they could get for the boat. It just says they leave everything immediately. When you move, when God calls, you're able to see the hand of God moving everywhere you go. Maybe it's not that God hasn't answered your prayers. Maybe you're too busy doing the day-to-day things to realize and recognize that God is giving you direction, that God is trying to talk to you. Number 2, get as close to God as you can. Peter never let any space develop between him and Jesus. Remember, we talked about that distance breeds denial. He was always around him. He's constantly speaking to him, gets upset when Jesus predicts his death, doesn't allow any correction to turn his heart against Jesus. He just appears to always want to be around him. And because of this, he's brought to places where he gets to see miracles. He's brought to a place where he hears the voice of God and the transfiguration of Jesus Christ. See, Christians today, they want the benefit of a relationship with Jesus Christ, but at a distance. Christians today want the benefits at a distance. They want the blessing and the miracles they hear of, but they're not willing to go where they're going to find them, and that's as close to God as possible. I heard someone say, like, the closer I get, like, the more that I listen, the closer I get to God, the more I read, the worse I feel. And I'm like, it's because God is showing you that there's still something wrong in your life. Like, that's good that you feel it. Like, because you're realizing exactly how unworthy we are of salvation, how unworthy we are of the gift of salvation because of our sinful nature, because of what we've done with our lives. That's a good thing. Just keep pressing forward, because I promise you, the day that you hand your life over to God, the day that you receive that salvation is the greatest day of your life, because everything is lifted off your shoulders. Number 3, fear will block faith. And one of the most famous narratives in all the Gospels, and one of the ones that is frequently used in sermons, is really Peter walking on the water. The storm's blowing, and Peter calls out to Jesus and says, if that's you, call me out into the water. And Jesus says, come. He gets out, and for a few moments, Peter's walking on the same water that Jesus is. But it was fear that began to overshadow the miracle, causing him to sink, causing him to cry out for Jesus to save him. See, he took his eyes off of Jesus Christ and put them on the waters. Faith doesn't mean the absence of fear. It's following what God has called you to do despite the fear. There are several scriptures in the Bible where God tells us, like, do not fear, for I am with you. He's knowing it's something that's very human of us. He's saying it's something you're going to have to live with and deal with, but just know that I'm right here with you, because most of our fears span from isolation, span from there's nobody I can go to, span from I'm alone in this. And God says, fear not, for I am there with you. God's telling us not to fear, so he knows that is a very common thing, a reaction. But we're told he's still in the midst of it. And if we keep following our directions, you'll find yourself in the midst of miracles. And lastly, don't let your failures overshadow your calling. Peter, who constantly was requiring redirection from Jesus Christ, even though he was passionately refused to acknowledge it, denied and ran away from Christ. And you know that Peter, seeing what he had saw, being part of what he did, a couple of nights before this, he hears the voice of God. He sees Moses and Ezekiel standing there with Jesus Christ. He sees all this, denies Christ, and runs. He goes back to his old life, fishing. Jesus has to call him back out the exact same way he did before. And I think there's something pointing to that. I think Jesus is like, look, I knew you were going to do it, but I also know that you are called. I told you were going to do it, Peter. Like, we're good. Just come back. Follow me. But after Jesus reinstates Peter, he goes immediately into action and takes the gospel into 3 different societies and builds a church that continues 2,000 plus years later. He didn't let anything that he had done stop what he was going to do. Failure doesn't disqualify you. Yes, Peter made some huge blunders, but God still had a plan for him that were greater than the mistakes that he had made, as long as you're willing to acknowledge your failures and ask for redemption, ask for salvation. So that's Peter. In a nutshell, he does a lot more throughout the Bible. I just wanted to go strictly after his character, not after his deeds and different things that he'd done. But just appreciate you tuning in tonight. Just remember, please keep our founding pastors in your prayers. As Sister McKinnis, she's been admitted to a hospital in Los Angeles County. She was supposed to be at our Harvesters Conference for our mother church, and she needs to come home. But she's doing well. She's in good spirits. They're just running tests at this point, she's stable. But they just want to make sure that they've ruled out everything else before they let her go. But pray, that these tests come back negative and that she's allowed to travel back home so we can get her to see her private physicians, her primary care physician here in Fresno, as they would have much more of a history with her and they would know exactly what to do. But just keep them up in your prayers. As I know Pastor Willie, he's down there as well with his wife and probably just stressing over this. And you guys don't need to stress. God's in control, but we'll just keep you guys up in our prayers. And if the church can just unite for that and keep praying for them until we hear great news and a word from God. So don't forget, you can continue to give this ministry, support this church via tithes, offerings, and love gifts. You can do that on your smartphone, either from the iStore or Google Play. You can find the app called Easy Tithe. Just search Praise Chapel Fresno and Easy Tithe, and it'll show you exactly which one you can give to. You can also download it on your desktop if you want to do it that way, maybe for a bit more security. You can do that by visiting easytithe.com, downloading the app, and it'll be on your desktop. Or you can go to www.praisechapelfresno.com, and it's going to, on the menu bar, you can hit give, and it'll take you to a third-party website that we're contracted with. Or if you want to mail in, drop off your tithes or offerings or love gifts, but you don't know you need our address, just Google Praise Chapel Fresno, California. You'll see our address. Mail it and drop it off. We're here at the building or at the campus frequently, so it's not going to go unnoticed, and it's not just going to get picked up. It's going to get deposited in a timely manner. So we love you guys. Don't forget, if you're going to be going to the April 1st kind of picnic that's going to be up in the mountains at our brother Rudy's house. Such an amazing thing he's built out there. I absolutely fell in love with it when I saw it, and I kind of saw it in some beginning stages, then I saw it in kind of some later stages, so I'm excited to see what it looks like. Should be a ton of fun for kids up there, but we just love you guys. We'll see you guys Sunday, 10 o'clock. Make sure you keep in contact with your soil. You're the salt of the earth. Just keep in contact with that soil. Let things grow and protect people from the things that they don't even know are coming against them in their lives. Like when you pray for someone from your work or someone that you know, and they don't even know you're praying for them, they're receiving the blessing of protection just because you refuse to let the enemy continue to attack them. Just realize that much, that all of that you're investing into these individuals is going to come to fruition. It is going to grow, and you've been protecting them all this time, and they've never known it. And one day, they will realize the name of Jesus Christ is the only way that they can see heaven, and they will thank you time and time again for opening your mouth and speaking to them and telling them that they need Jesus and they need to get to church. But we love you guys. We'll see you guys Sunday, 10 a.m. Come excited and expecting God to do something. We'll see you then.